I thought I was doing everything right. For years, I studied English. I spent hours memorizing grammar rules, translating words in my head, and practicing textbook dialogues. But when I had to speak, my mind went blank. Words got stuck. Sentences felt awkward. Conversations were full of long, uncomfortable pauses. I felt embarrassed, frustrated, stuck. But then I noticed something strange, something that made me question everything I knew about learning English. A child, a 4-year-old playing outside. She spoke English fluently, effortlessly. She had never studied grammar, never memorized vocabulary lists, and yet she spoke better than I did. How was that possible? That moment changed everything for me because I realized learning English isn't about studying. It's about something else. And when I discovered what that something else was, my progress exploded. I started speaking fluently, confidently, and faster than I ever thought possible. But it wasn't easy. First, I had to unlearn everything I'd been taught. When I first started learning English, I followed the traditional way: study grammar, memorize vocabulary, translate in my head before speaking. That's what teachers said. That's what textbooks said. But do you know what happened? Nothing. I could read. I could write. But when it came to speaking, I was stuck. The words were there, somewhere in my brain, but they wouldn't come out. Every conversation felt like a test. I was so worried about making mistakes that I barely spoke at all. And the worst part? I saw other people who had studied less than me, speaking English effortlessly. Why? Because they were learning differently. And I was about to discover how. I knew something had to change. I had spent years stuck in the same cycle, studying, memorizing, translating, but never speaking fluently. And then I thought about that child again. She had never opened a grammar book, never memorized verb tenses, and yet she spoke perfectly. That's when I realized she was learning English the way it was meant to be learned, not through study, but through immersion. So I made a radical decision. I stopped studying grammar rules. I stopped translating in my head. I stopped forcing myself to memorize lists of words I would never use in real conversations. Instead, I started doing something different, something powerful. I started learning English like a child. I made a rule: no translating. If I wanted to speak English fast, I had to think in English first. So I surrounded myself with the language. I listened to English every day: podcasts, movies, real conversations. I shadowed native speakers, repeating what they said, copying their rhythm, their tone, their flow. I learned in context, not from textbooks, but from real situations. And guess what happened? Suddenly, my brain stopped hesitating. Words started coming out naturally. I wasn't thinking about grammar, I was just speaking. For the first time, English felt easy. I'd finally cracked the code. Learning English wasn't about memorizing rules. It was about exposure, repetition, natural immersion. The more I listened, the more I absorbed. The more I spoke, the faster I improved. And before I knew it, I was speaking English fluently, not perfectly, but confidently. And that was the real goal. And you can do the same. You don't need years of studying. You don't need perfect grammar. You just need the right method. But there's one more thing, one final step that made the biggest difference of all. And that's what I'm going to share next. I was finally speaking English faster, listening every day, shadowing native speakers, thinking in English instead of translating. It was working, but then something strange happened. I hit a wall. At first, my progress was incredible. I went from struggling to forming sentences effortlessly. But after a few months, I stopped improving. I felt like I was running on a treadmill, moving, but not getting anywhere. I could speak. But I wasn't fluent. My words weren't as natural as a native speaker's. My conversation still had awkward pauses, and worst of all, I felt like I had maxed out my progress. Then I noticed something. Every time I spoke, I made the same mistakes. I was stuck using the same phrases, the same vocabulary, the same expressions. I was comfortable, but not growing. And that's when I discovered the final piece of the puzzle. If I wanted to speak English 10x faster, I needed to train like a native speaker. I call it the active output method, the fastest way to improve your speaking. Here's how it works. Step one, stop being a passive learner. Just listening to English isn't enough. You have to speak out loud every single day, even if you have no one to talk to. Talk to yourself. Describe what you see, what you think, what you feel in English. Step two, copy, don't create. Instead of struggling to form sentences, copy how native speakers talk. When you hear a phrase like, I'll take a coffee to go, that sounds good. I'm running late. Don't just understand it. Memorize it, repeat it, use it. The more you copy, the faster you speak. Step three, record yourself and fix your mistakes. This is the secret that took my learning to the next level. Every day I recorded myself speaking. Then I listened back and compared it to native speakers. I caught my mistakes. I corrected my pronunciation. I fixed my rhythm. And in just a few weeks, my English went from good to natural and fluent. This method changed everything. I stopped studying English and started living it. And that's how I finally broke free. How I learned to speak English 10 times faster, and now. It's your turn. If you've been stuck like I was, if you've been translating in your head, struggling to speak fluently, try this. Listen every day. Shadow native speakers. Think in English, speak out loud, record yourself, and in just a few weeks, you'll see the difference. English will become natural, effortless, automatic. You'll finally speak like you've always wanted to. So start today and remember learning. English isn't about being perfect. It's about being confident. The more you speak, the faster you grow. If this episode helped you, subscribe for more. Because fluency isn't a dream, it's a decision. And you're closer than you think.